And if we don't know what motivates our team, then how can you be an effective leader if you don't know what motivates them? So part of it is getting to know who your team is. In any mission that we're getting after, the idea is to build, in my mind as a leader, effective, high-performing teams. And it's a little more difficult to do that when you're 100% remote. Doesn't mean that it can't be done. And just because there are great opportunities doesn't mean it's the right fit for you, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be someone on keyboard to be in this space. It's very broad. But if you're interested in the technical space, those would be two that would be, give it a try and see if you like, what you're trying to do.
Hello, everyone, and this is Jim West, founder of TopCyberPro.com. And today's guest is an esteemed leader in the Department of Defense. He's a retired general. I've had the pleasure of serving underneath him and his leadership at U.S. Arcent in Kuwait, Camp Air John, Kuwait. He's a phenomenal leader, a phenomenal human being, actually, to go beyond just the uniform, but a phenomenal, great man here, Mr. Garrett Yee. Sir, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little summary, so for the people that are just now getting to know who you are.
Well, thanks, Jim, for having me on your show today. Great to see you and hear your voice. A little bit about me, a native Californian, and just retired in 2022 after 35 years of combined active and reserve service from the Army. Retired as an Army 2-star general. I finished my time up at the Defense Information Systems Agency at Fort Meade, Maryland. And I know that the time we spent together in 2014-15 in Southwest Asia was a very memorable time, a lot going on. Just an amazing opportunity to be there at a critical time in our nation's history. So good to see you again today.
Likewise, sir. Again, the honor is truly all mine. I just want to dive right into it because I know there's so much questions we have, and I know you have a tremendously busy schedule. So let's go right into the first question. Obviously, you're a great man and a great leader, but what would you consider as the greatest attributes or qualities that a person needs to have to be a leader today?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that always come to my mind when it comes to leadership, and that is, leadership is situational, right? You have to have a number of different tools to be able to lead folks in different situations. And so there's not a one-size-fits-all style of leadership. Every person brings their own strengths to the table. One thing you always want to think about is who your audience is. Who are you leading, right? Everyone is motivated differently. And it's our job as leaders to provide purpose, direction, motivation to get the job done. And if we don't know what motivates our team, then how can you be an effective leader if you don't know what motivates them? So part of it is getting to know who your team is, at a very fundamental, basic level. Nothing fancy. Who are they? And literally, do they have families? What's important to them? Why are they here? Some very basic stuff. Nothing that would be considered fancy or exquisite or some secret formula to leadership, in my mind at least.
Okay, great. I love that answer. Nowadays in IT and cyber, because since 2020, the COVID, the lockdowns, and quarantine, IT got a real big boost into trying to keep the connections up, keep the networks going, help people with the transition of remote work. So there's been a lot of IT cyber burnout, a lot of people that are overworked and stressed. And you mentioned motivation. What would be a thing you would advise leaders that are struggling with, attrition rates, with people leaving or wanting to request more remote work when it's not, available, because a lot of people are trying to get people back in the office, and, remote work is more of now coming to be not the normal, but more of a, I guess, the struggle is get people back in the office. So what would be some guides you'd give leaders for that?
Yeah, you covered actually a number of topics there in that one little statement of yours there, Jim. So we did get through just an incredible transformation from working in brick and mortar buildings. For the most part, many were already remote workers, but for the most part, especially in the government spaces, but also in the commercial spaces, where people are used to coming into work. And then we figured out how to do it remotely for the masses, right? And to many folks that were working remotely, they felt empowered. They felt like they were just as productive. And as leaders, we did see the production of certain things maintained, or even in some cases, the production stepped up. And so the argument was, well, if I can do this effectively remotely, then why do I ever need to come back to work, right? And there's a great story in helping to enable the remote workforce, by the way. Some Herculean efforts by private sector industry to be able to provide the tools to be able to work remotely, and during that time also to help ensure that the cybersecurity aspect of that was addressed as well, so that you can work remotely securely, right? That was a big story. You talked about burnout. We'll talk about that real quickly. I think that folks, want to be appreciated for what they do. And so these huge efforts by, cyber and IT professionals, during the height of the pandemic to enable folks to work remotely at times was maybe not as fully appreciated as could have been. And folks will work and do whatever they can for the cause if they're appreciated. It was taken for granted, then why am I working extra? Why am I putting the added effort into it? And so to your question about, the burnout, part of that it was, I think, yes, working super hard, long hours, but also maybe not being as appreciated. Now, everyone needs to take a knee, and reset. And so I think sometimes in the IT and cyber workforce, it's difficult to do because the mission never ends, right? And if someone is like the key, person on some system, taking a break can really be hard, and you're taking, some time off and you're getting calls and emails. Well, then you're never really getting that break, right? Sure. So now to the point of like the remote work and why not come back to work and I'm just as effective. Well, I would say that, a couple of factors that I think, come to my mind, and I'm not saying that folks need to come back to work or need to be remote. I'm just trying to be, agnostic here in this statement. What I saw was we had a workforce. In my situation, I was at the Defense Information Systems Agency, and we had already built working relationships and trust amongst each other prior to the onset of the pandemic and remote work. And so we already knew each other and were able to work, collaboratively, remotely. But what we also saw was folks that onboarded during remote work had a harder time, becoming part of the team. And in any organization, in any mission that we're getting after, the idea is to build, in my mind as a leader, effective, high-performing teams. And it's a little more difficult to do that when you're 100% remote. Doesn't mean that it can't be done, but it's harder and it takes longer in some cases. I know that for myself personally, that face-to-face interaction over time is what helps to build the trust in that relationship. And if it takes time in person, it's even more difficult, I think, at times to do it remotely. Okay. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's not the same. I know that if I take a business trip with a couple of colleagues for a couple of days, by the time I come back from that trip, I know that person way better in 2 or 3 days than maybe I would have after 6 months of in the office, even, right? Having meals together, waiting around at the airport together, finding something to talk about, right? That's when you get to know your folks, your team members. And so, therein lies the challenge. How do you build, a team that knows each other, trusts each other, can perform, you know, doing that remotely. So doesn't mean it can't be done, but
More
you know,
challenge.
for some professions, a lot harder.
Okay. So I'm gonna throw you a kind of a curveball just so we can kind of have some
Yeah,
levity in this podcast. But Star Wars or Star Trek?
you know, I get that asked, every once in a while, and I'm confused. I grew up with both.
Uh-huh.
I was a fan of both. And I think there's parts of both that I enjoy a lot. And
Uh-huh.
so I'll pick one just to, pick a side for today. I'll pick Star Wars today,
Okay.
just
Well,
because I grew up in the '80s, and
okay.
1978 was, I was in eighth grade, and it was a big year for
Year. It was
Star Trek.
I think it was New Hope was in theaters about that time.
Yeah,
So the first one. So you're saying more of the original trilogy as opposed to the newer, because even
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Star Trek and Star Wars, we have to talk about the newer ones or the older ones. So I'm more of a fan of the original trilogy as well, but I'm also a fan of Star Trek, but the original, like the original Captain Kirk, Spock, and
Oh,
so
I know.
yeah,
Those the spandex uniforms, whatever they call it, material,
yeah.
was awesome.
Oh,
And Captain Kirk, man, he seemed to be hooking up with every alien in the galaxy. I tell you what, that was a lot of fun watching.
all right, so let's dive back into IT cyber. So, can you tell me a bit about the moment you decided that IT and cyber was for you? And is there a story behind that moment? And then, if you could go back in time right now to that point in time, what would be the advice you'd give that person that made that decision then?
Yeah, for me it was 2011. When I went forward to Afghanistan for a year as a deputy commander for the 335th. And for me, seeing the importance of having, a robust, resilient network to support the warfighter up close was what sold it for me. At the same time, because we were in a combat zone, the importance of cybersecurity to ensure we had a protected network was right there in front of you. And so the last thing you wanted to be was stuck with a problem. Your responsibility as a service provider for the network. And so, if I were to give advice myself back then, what might that be? So you're running around, you're trying to do lots of stuff. Uh, I was trying to soak it all in. Maybe I would say, maybe not be so hard on yourself. That's a lot of us, I would say, in this space, know that there is just so much to stay on top of. It never ends. And
Yeah.
so, okay, just you can't know everything. You can't have the answer to everything. You just do the best you can and don't be so hard on yourself.
Great advice. Actually, that might be what answers this next question. There's a lot of young people that they hear in the news every day about the data hacks and breaches. They hear about the cybersecurity skills gap. They hear about the jobs. They hear about the attractive salaries and so forth. So, and of course, every day we're battled with new emerging technologies. So, for young people that are thinking about what's next post high school, I know that the Army Cyber Corps has a great program for young people to go into. There's all kinds of DoD as well as federal and other programs that they can consider. What would be your advice to a young person saying, is cyber something I want to do and explore? What would be your advice to that young person?
I'd say jump right in. The water's warm. Within that space, there are so many different things that anyone could explore. And if you're a little bit curious about how things work, then there are endless opportunities to grow intellectually, whether it be on the IT infrastructure or the cybersecurity side, or data, or AI type stuff where you really have to dig into learning some advanced stuff there. But it is wide open, and it's the future.
Yep. Everything somehow has cyber embedded or interconnected with it. Um, let's go with another curveball real quick. And
Yeah.
this is kind of a humorous one, a very debatable question, but is a hot dog a sandwich?
Yeah, what defines a sandwich, man? I guess um, is a lobster roll a sandwich?
It's
I don't
chicken.
know, man. It's between bread and there's some kind of meat between. I would say a hot dog would have to be a sandwich.
That would be a sandwich. Okay. All right.
What
So
do
just
others say?
I don't think a hot dog's a sandwich, because to me the sandwich is about separation of two pieces of bread. So like peanut butter
Ah,
sandwich, grilled cheese. To me, if the roll was split in half, then we have a sandwich. But it's in a bun, and so therefore, but then the hamburgers are in a bun, but the bread is separated. I don't know. To me, it's
I've
about
I've had
separation.
my share of hot dogs with a bread split.
Okay, so I guess it could be both. Maybe it's versatile. All right. So jumping back in, you mentioned earlier in one of your answers about, new technology for young people. It's always changing and exciting. And obviously, this is a question as a leader, I'm sure you get asked. I'm sure, there's so much information regarding this. But let's first just talk high level about what are some emerging technologies that you're excited about, that you believe is going to be, strategic or important for leaders to be, well versed on and understand.
Well, the one in front of us is ChatGPT,
Most definitely.
period. And and I think I just read an article where, it just almost passed some medical exam or something. I mean, so the possibilities of improving how we do things is right there in front of us. And so, how do we not leverage that to, make learning better, to be able to provide, better, reading opportunities, and in our space, you know, to build better proposals, right? So we get caught up a lot on some of the mechanics of stuff,
Hmm.
where this could help, like maybe take care of some mechanics and focus really on the solutions, right? In proposals, I think there's a lot of words we use to be compliant with an RFP in our case. And so, if you spend that energy on solutioning versus, compliance to something that I think ChatGPT over time can help, then we would have better solutions for, in my case, what we do in support of the military.
Mhm. I see like different tech. Like I think the Air Force has this like super augmented reality helmet in one of their jets that helps like with targeting and identifying things for the pilot. I love how we're bridging our interaction with technology to help us, raise awareness about threats and indicators. I love how that's also kind of, how we visualize dashboards with CM products. So that way we, instead of just looking at raw data, we have these tools like machine learning and AI rolling things up into an easy to read visual report, so that, like you said, we are quicker to make a decision or prioritize what actions or where we put our efforts. I definitely like where technology is going there, but there's a lot of people out there. The internet's full of, the one side that thinks it's a great thing coming, and the other side think it's doomsday. So, what would be something you would say to people that would say, well, what if AI takes over the world and Skynet and Terminator's true and James Cameron tried to warn us through several films and we didn't listen? What would you say to that?
Well, in the space that I currently work at within the defense sector, I would say if there is something out there that allows us to make more informed decisions sooner, then we need it, right? Because it's between us and the adversary. And at the end of the day, it's about leaders being able to make informed decisions. And the sooner that we can make those informed decisions, the better off we could be, the more lethal we can be, or the better defense we could be in terms of what we're trying to do. So at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. All of the technology, all the tools, all the data, at the end of the day, it comes down to making decisions.
Making decisions. I agree 100% with that. So, for people that don't know you really well, I know that you're like myself. I travel very extensively and frequently, and I know you also have been fortunate enough to travel as well in your lifetime to see many countries and cultures. Earlier you mentioned, support operations of Afghanistan and other regions of the world. As someone that this is not really where cyber and IT doesn't always translate, but I know you've had the benefit of supporting like our coalition partners and other nation states. How has, I guess, having that broader global perspective as a leader helped you when you do support and work with other like partners and people from different backgrounds and cultures? I know for myself, the biggest attribute is just patience, because just because I might be frustrated with either the language barrier or a cultural thing, it's a matter of patience to understand. Like first seek to understand before you start making judgments or responding in negativity, like in anger or frustration, right? So I'm assuming you must be a Zen master at that, because I know you interface with so many people from around the world in your career. So what is, I guess, some advice and moments that you can share of your travels?
Yeah, just sit back and listen. Just not be in a hurry to say what's on your mind when you're dealing with other folks. Try to understand, listen to understand what's going on, right? And I think sometimes, especially in the space that I was in, just the defense, the military world, we are so action oriented, default to action, which is important when it comes to a situation where a decision needs to be made, right? But when you're talking about trying to build coalitions, about seeing a bigger picture of what we're trying to do, then you have to sit back and take it in for a bit, assess what's going on, and decide just how fast something needs to get done, right? Don't be quick to failure. Don't be quick to misunderstand. So I would say, your point is well taken. Patience, absolutely, absolutely. Understand that there's a bigger picture in mind here. There's a saying that that we use in shooting shotguns: slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Move as fast.
Right. And not unlike what maybe an engineer might say, measure twice and cut once,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly.
So, think about a bigger picture of mind. How do you build a coalition? How fast do you need to build it? What do you need, as part of that, and then move out?
Okay. A little follow up to that, since we're mentioning travel and the world. What are your favorite places to visit in the world?
Well, I think many places have elements that I think are kind of neat. I like Jordan in a way because Jordan has just this rich biblical history. And so when you get to go to a place like that and see with your own eyes and experience, what others experienced thousands of years ago that you read about, it's kind of cool.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness, it was
so
used as the backdrop for the movie The Martian as well. So it's just surreal landscapes. But Jordan is a very popular filming location for a lot of films that are set in the Middle East. But yeah, it's a beautiful country. The Dead Sea, Petra. Oh yeah,
yeah.
love that place. Um, what is the last book you read?
Last book, well, I'm currently reading a book about I'm trying to think of the name of it, but um, written by Peter, oh gosh, Singer, and it's it's a few years old. The book title escapes me, but it's about uh, um, privatized militaries. So
Okay.
where we, you know, um, you know, how did this all evolve? And interestingly, private militaries have been around for a long, long time.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then, during this past, 50 years or whatever, it's really grown into a business as well. I mean, it's always was a business, but in the elaborateness of how private militaries operate today. So to me, it's interesting because that's the space that I'm currently working within. I'm a fan of Peter Singer and his books. He's written a number of books that I've enjoyed over the past several years. One is called Like War: The Weaponization of Social Media. Kind of
Oh.
a favorite for if you're in this space,
Mhm.
the IT cyberspace. So I tend towards those. I also read a lot of leadership books. I feel like leadership is something that I, want to continue to work at getting better at. So
You mentioned privatized militaries. It's funny because that was like a main theme plot point for several Call of Duty video games. So the video games have kind of also taken up that theme as well. So it's very interesting how it shows that. And in real life, I mean, in the Middle East, I know the UAE has a small sector of it's privatized. And not to go too deep into details, but a lot of the Middle East countries and other countries around the world have looked into privatized military. So I'll put a pin in there because I want to get into some more questions with the little bit of time we have left. But can you talk about let's talk about cloud computing, because I know we talked AI and chat GPT. I'm not cloud computing, I'm sorry. Let's talk quantum computing. A lot of folks are concerned about, this, the advances every day. We got another company research firm that has gotten more qubits aligned, and we're waiting for, I guess, the more practical applications of quantum computing to come. From your perspective, what do you see on that soon come over the horizon for that?
Well, it's here now. And so if we don't act like it's, critical to get after, then we're wrong. In my mind, at least in my opinion, as a nation, uh, if we're not on top of it, I don't know how far along a few other countries are, but they're working really hard at it,
Yes, most
right?
definitely.
And so it's not Moore's law, but this thing is getting shorter and shorter in terms of the time frame that we need to be ready, and
Yes.
maybe it's already too late. So that is something that, in my mind, is not something you just kind of put on the "that's interesting" category. That is actually something that we need to focus on here and now.
Okay. And just a couple questions left, Mr. Yee. Do you prefer Mr. Yee or General Yee? Because I'm so used to calling you General.
I go by Garrett.
Garrett. Okay. Well, Garrett, and it's an honor to be able to call you by your first name. So just again, I'm just happy to have you on this podcast. But I got a couple last questions for you before we wrap. This again, we mentioned about young people looking post high school, but let's focus on the person that is not out of high school. Let's focus on a person that might be in their late 20s, mid 30s, that is maybe considering moving out of the uniform, or someone's moving out of another career field. Let's say they were in the medical field or in oil and gas, and life happens and they say, you know what, I'm ready for a career change. Obviously, in our world in DoD, we have a thing called DoD 8570, which is now 8140, that talks about the training, experience requirements, and certifications you need to have. So just on certifications alone, what would you recommend to these folks that if they're trying to say, what is my destination certification wise, what would you say would be like the top, let's say 1 to 3 certs off the top of your head, you think that would be worthy destinations for someone to focus on studying so they can enter into this field?
Well, Net plus, Sec plus are just kind of like the foundational ones, right? And then you'll decide whether or not you like it or not, right? Yeah. Okay, so you have to like what you're doing, and just because there are great opportunities doesn't mean it's the right fit for you, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be someone on keyboard to be in this space. It's very broad. But if you're interested in the technical space, those would be two that would be, give it a try and see if you like, what you're trying to do. But don't be like, thwart it off if that's not something you like, because there are other, jobs in the space. There are jobs in development. There are jobs in architecture. There are jobs in the corporate support to IT, like finance and contracts. And so IT and cyber is an industry where it requires a holistic capability of the workforce to be able to do what we do in IT cyber. So you don't have to be the person on keyboard. There are other opportunities as well.
Lots and lots of opportunities. Great answer, sir. And then the last question is, can you share with us what is coming next for you career-wise? Like any exciting programs, projects, events, conferences you're looking forward to attend? What is happening in the life of Garrett now?
Yeah, let's give a little plug for GDIT, General Dynamics Information Technology, where I work. I'm responsible for the Army and the defense agencies sector. It's about 3,100 employees in 19 countries around the world. We do a lot of business in support of the military, and I don't refer to it as contracts. I refer to it oftentimes as missions. We support a number of missions in that space. Very exciting. And so for me, it's been just over a year since my retirement ceremony last April in 2022, and so as I've been able to kind of get my feet underneath me in this assignment, which is an amazing assignment, I'm able to see all that we do, but really around the world. Just got back from Hawaii 2 weeks ago, and then this past week was down in Daleville, Alabama, where we support an important mission down there. And then on Tuesday night, I'll be flying out to Wiesbaden and then Powitz and Poznan in Poland to see what our workforce is doing there to support all the operations right there in Eastern Europe. As you know, it's a very busy space.
Yes, it is.
And so literally what's next for me in 2 days is going to Europe and seeing how we can better support our teammates over there in that part of the world. I feel very fortunate to have this job. It's a job where I get to stay, close to the fight and support the warfighter. I put a post out on LinkedIn just yesterday, I think, about what it's like to be on this side. And, what I'm telling folks out there is they're wondering, that are those that may be transitioning at some point out of uniform, what it's like on this side. And I'm saying that there are times when I feel just as proud of what I do today as what I did while I was in uniform. I can't speak for everyone else, but the job I have and the things I get to see and do and see how we support our warfighters is just incredible. Our workforce that are on these missions says to support our Army are just as dedicated, they're professionals, as hardworking as anyone you'll meet. And so for me, that's exciting to see. And, I close it out by saying, if you're wondering what it's like, depending on what you choose, the water's warm. It's kind of nice out here.
Wonderful. Well, Garrett, thank you. Tremendous thank you for me and both Terry, and apologies that Terry couldn't be here, but just an honor to have you on our podcast. Again, you're just a phenomenal leader, and as I say, an even better, great human being with everything that you do, and so generous with your time and energy. So thank you so much. So thank you from us and the folks that are watching from TopCyberPro.com.
Hey, well, thanks for having me on, Jim. Good to see you.